I've teamed up with Lancaster Cancer Center to pull some of these cooking classes together called Dishes to Nourish. So this month, August, we are going to be talking about the topic of sugar and cancer. And so today we're going to talk about that topic first, and then we're going to dive into a recipe that is a lentil banana bread. And we'll talk about kind of ways to give some alternative sweeteners or sugar additives into your recipes. So before we dive into the actual recipe, we're going to talk about that topic of sugar and cancer. I have heard a lot of questions around this, whether you need to cut it out completely, or what role sugar does play in your treatment process or even in your recovery or survivorship process. With sugar, it's first good to look at that definition of sugar. So sometimes individuals will describe sugar as simply any added sugar, so any syrups, any cane sugar, maple syrup, honey, anything that's added in that would sweeten. Any like fruits, or even just dairy has lactose, which is a natural sugar. Those would be considered separate than the added sugars. So usually what we're talking about when we're talking about sugar and cancer, or the concerns that I hear, it more relates to how about the sugar, such as cane sugar or maple syrup or honey or any kind of sweetener added into my foods, or baked goods, sodas, sweetened beverages. Those are the concerns I hear. So when we're talking about this today, that's kind of the sugars I'm going to be talking mostly about. But with sugar and cancer, I hear a lot of the concern of, should I cut sugar out because I'm afraid, or I heard that the sugar feeds my cancer cells, when research has shown, and also just how our body works, your cancer cells are going to take energy from what you eat, but it doesn't really matter what you're eating. So if you're eating, if you eat a peach versus a cookie, your body is still going to use that energy. And I think that's important to look at. Not only your cancer cells might take that energy, but your body is taking that energy. So the key there is just making sure you're getting enough carbohydrates when we're taking that step back, not just looking at sugar, but carbohydrates as a whole, and making sure that we're still mindful maybe of the amount of sugar, just because it can affect your energy levels. It's also just beneficial from the dietary guidelines, just to make sure that we're getting nutrient-dense calories as much as possible. Does that mean that it's bad to have added sugar? No, it's okay to have added sugar. It's just good to be mindful of how much you're having in the day. So the dietary guidelines recommend about 1/4 of a cup total in your day. That's about 12 teaspoons or 4 tablespoons. Again, that might be an average in your week. You may have some days that you have a little bit more sugar than others. Also, too, I think this is good to think about through cancer treatment, and you might have different side effects, and some of you may have different goals than others. So if you have questions on, I'm having trouble getting enough calories, or I'm losing weight, or I need to be mindful of how much I'm taking in, some of these recommendations change because our top priority is making sure you're getting food and you're getting fuel more than the specifics of what you're having. So if you have further questions about that, please reach out to Lancaster Cancer Center, or you can reach out to me individually as well with Simply Nutrition. So all of that to say, we want to be mindful of the amount of sugar that we're taking in, but we don't want it to control all of our decisions. And there are times that you might want something sweet, and that is okay. The recipe I chose today was a lentil chocolate chip banana bread. That does not mean that you can't make regular banana bread, but at times we do want something that might be a little bit more satisfying or keep us full longer. When we're looking at carbohydrates, sugars tend to increase our blood sugar quickly and drop it. So what happens is that makes your energy kind of rise and drop quickly. there are carbohydrates that are higher in fiber, and fiber just takes longer to digest in your body, so it keeps you full longer. So sometimes getting a good balance of that in some of your options, especially if you're using this as a snack, can be great. Or even if you are watching your blood sugars through treatment, it is helpful having that higher fiber content to help kind of keep you consistent and keep you within range. So again, you can make regular banana bread, but today we're going to be making lentil banana bread. So I wanted to first kind of give a shout out to this lovely Pulse's cookbook. It was sponsored by Pulse, the American Pulse Association, and this is adapted from their recipe, and they got it from Two Peas in Their Pod. It's a blog that you can look at. So that's the base of this recipe. I did adapt it for today. So it is a little different, but I wanted to let you know that's kind of where I based a lot of this recipe off of, and you can find that online. But the first thing in this recipe is lentils. So we talked about that already. If you have not cooked lentils, lentils can take a little bit of time. They can take about 45 minutes to cook. When you are making your lentils, you do want about, like for a half a cup dried lentils, which is what is in this recipe, you would want about 1 cup and 1/4 cup of water to bring to a boil and add the lentils, and you simmer that for you bring it to a boil and then you simmer for about 45 minutes. I actually like to make my lentils in bulk because they take so long. So if you like this recipe, I recommend just making a couple cups at a time, like 3 cups of dry lentils to 6 cups of water, and cooking it and then freezing it. So I actually had lentils frozen, ready to go for today. And what calls for a half a cup of dry lentils. So this is 1.5 cups of cooked lentils. And the first step is blending it down. So I'm not gonna actually show you blending because that would be noisy. So I blended it really nice and smooth. I don't know if you can see that with the video, but it's almost like a puree lentil. You will need to add some water, probably about 2 tablespoons to 1/4 cup to your lentils so they do get to a nice blend. And you can do that in a food processor or blender. So that is the first step that you want to do. You can use just a regular bread loaf, a 9 by 5 inch bread loaf pan, but I actually have a mini bread loaf pan, so we're gonna use that today. If you're doing the regular pan, it's going to take about 55 minutes. With the smaller loaves, it takes about 20 to 30 depending on your oven. I did preheat the oven to 350, so you want to make sure you do that as well if you are making this recipe. So the first step we're going to do is take our sugar and butter and cream it. So in this recipe, they do call for 1 cup of sugar, which you definitely can do. But I actually substituted half of that, so it's 1/2 cup of applesauce as an alternative and 1/2 cup of sugar. Just a way to have some of those, I know that the apple is going to add sugar because it's natural sugar, but just to kind of bring down that added sugar amount. And also give it some different flavor as well. So I'm gonna add that, and then it calls for 1/2 cup of unsalted softened butter. So I'm gonna put this all in, and I will blend it, and then I will be back. After that is blended together, then you're going to add in 2 eggs. I always like to crack my eggs before so I don't have to wash my hands after cracking them. That way I can wash my hands, keep it separate. Then you're also going to add mashed bananas. This is 3 mashed bananas, about 1 cup. So depending on which size, I know it can be really hard when they're saying like 3 bananas, about 1 cup. And that's gonna add some nice sweetness to our bread and some nice moistness. We're also going to add our lentil puree in here. I recommend a spatula to try to get it because it can be a little sticky out of the blender. cup and a half of lentil puree. And then we're going to move on to our next ingredient, which is buttermilk. So it calls for 4 tablespoons of buttermilk. So if you don't have buttermilk, which like I don't have buttermilk, all I did was add 1 teaspoon of vinegar to 4 tablespoons of the milk. And you can use any type of milk that you would like. You stir it and you let it set, and it'll almost like thicken. It's acidified milk, and it becomes like buttermilk. So I'm gonna put my 4 tablespoons of that in here with my 1 tablespoon of vinegar already mixed in there. And then I'm going to add vanilla, and that calls for a 1/2 teaspoon. I did run out of my little bowls, so we're going to just use this teaspoon measure, and we're gonna mix that all up. Now that we have this all nice and blended, so you wanna use the blender up to this point, it's nice and kind of a smooth consistency. It's going to be a little watery, and that's okay, because now we're going to add in our flour mixtures and all of the things that we need for baking. So it calls for 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So I have those pre-measured in here. So I'm gonna add that in. It also calls for 1 cup and 1/4 cup of regular flour. I substitute this for wheat flour just to give a little bit more fiber, but again, you can use regular flour if you prefer, or if you don't have wheat flour on hand. And so you could do a whole 1 cup and 1/4 cup of that. For this modification, I actually modified it to 1 cup, and we're gonna add 1/4 cup of flaxseed in. Just again, that's a seed that's ground down, so it's this nice thin powder. And what I love doing this with recipes is sometimes I cut back the flour and add some flaxseed instead, just to add extra fullness, because that's again what we're looking for in this recipe. So again, it's going to taste a little different than your normal banana bread, but if you are craving regular banana bread, you can also make that as well. This is just nice if you're using it as a snack or for breakfast, for something just a little bit more nourishing. So we're just going to keep blending this in. It really blends nicely because of the nice wet texture that it has. It really kind of soaks in that flour mixture well. I also find with this recipe, because sometimes when you switch to whole wheat flour, it gets dense. It's not as fluffy. So it is a little denser than regular bread, but what I like about it is because bananas are so moist and adds that moisture, the lentils add a little bit of moisture as well, and that applesauce is adding some moisture, so it actually ends up helping that texture a little bit more. And this is optional. You can add 1 cup of dark chocolate chips. That's my preference, but you can do regular chocolate chips, or if you don't like chocolate, or again, you want to cut back on the sugar, you can do dark chocolate. The higher percentage of dark chocolate usually has that lower amount of added sugar into it. Or if you want, you can also add cinnamon instead and a little bit of nutmeg. So you can do a lot of variations with this. I love chocolate. I'm a chocolate lover, I should say. I do love chocolate, so I'm gonna add it in. Especially too, if this is something that we're talking about for helping with when you're craving something sweet. And those, you just wanna mix in till it's even. And then you wanna evenly distribute the batter into your bread loaves. I usually use 1/4 cup measuring cup, and just go in each one until they're all full, and then we'll put this in the oven. Usually, again, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes at 350. After you have baked them, depending if you did the small loaves for about 30 minutes or the larger loaf, if you did the regular loaf pan, the 9x5, that's going to take longer, about 55 minutes. With this recipe, they're just going to get slightly golden brown around the edges and come out clean with a toothpick, and that's how you know they're done. It's wonderful. What I love about this size is they're nice snack size, so you can cut them into small pieces if you want. But if you do the larger loaf, you can also have the regular slice as well. You can make them into muffins too to enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have fun baking the